The snow fell incessantly, enveloping Katie and Michael's cabin in a ghostly silence. The couple, unaware of the looming threat, enjoyed the evening by the fireplace, sipping hot chocolate. A sudden creak against the window startled them. A shadow darted in the storm. Michael, with his heart pounding, approached to peer into the night. A tall, slender figure lurked furtively in the darkness. Terror gripped Katie and Michael. The storm hindered them as the pursuer approached relentlessly. An abandoned shed became their only hope. They hid inside, silently praying. Time stretched, each minute an eternity. The sound of a siren shattered the silence. The police had finally arrived. The man had disappeared into thin air. The police found no traces, only a boot print in the snow. Katie and Michael, haunted by nightmares and memories, found no peace. Who was that man? What did he want from them? Fear consumed them. A man showed up at the hospital where Katie worked. It was Thomas, devastated by the pain of his missing daughter. He had seen Katie's photo and, blinded by despair, had mistaken her for his daughter in the storm. Katie and Michael listened to Thomas's story with a mix of pity and suspicion. Was he truly just a desperate father, or was there something more sinister? They encountered Thomas several times, trying to understand his true intentions. One day, during a meeting with Thomas, Michael noticed a strange object in his bag. A knife. Tension escalated. The air became suffocating. Michael accused Thomas of being the man from the storm, but he vehemently denied it. Katie and Michael decided to investigate on their own. They followed Thomas and discovered he was associating with a shady character. They trailed him to an abandoned warehouse where a deadly trap awaited them. After an exhausting struggle, Michael exposed Thomas's accomplice. He was a human trafficker who had kidnapped Thomas's daughter. The man had been hired to scare Katie and Michael away from the investigation. In the excitement of the discovery, Michael noticed a detail that had escaped everyone, a small diary in Thomas's pocket. He opened it with trembling curiosity, devouring the pages filled with unspeakable secrets. Thomas was not just a desperate father, but a man with a dark past and a deceptive present. Reading the diary, Michael came across a series of disturbing entries. Thomas spoke of shady dealings, debts with dangerous people, and a desperate plan to settle his score. Fear crept back into Michael's heart. Was Thomas truly the man who had pursued Katie in the storm? Michael was torn. Should he confess Thomas's secrets to Katie, or would he risk feeding her paranoia? The trust between the two was hanging by a thread, threatened by a shadow of uncertainty. Determined to uncover the truth, Michael began investigating Thomas, following the traces left in the diary. He found himself in a world of secrets and lies, where every step was a danger and every encounter an enigma. His investigations led him to a seedy bar frequented by criminals and traffickers. Michael, with his heart in his throat, infiltrated the establishment, trying not to attract attention. The air was thick with smoke and tension. Danger lurked in every corner. Michael spotted Thomas in a corner of the bar, accompanied by shady individuals. He approached cautiously, ready to expose him. But just as he was about to confront the man, a hand gripped his shoulder forcefully. It was Katie who had followed him, concerned. In front of Katie, Michael confessed his suspicions about Thomas and showed her the diary. The girl, shocked by the revelations, didn't know what to believe. In a rising tension, Thomas noticed their presence and confronted them with anger. In the heat of the struggle, Thomas lost control and confessed his terrible guilt. It was he who had pursued Katie in the storm, driven by desperation and paranoia. He had lied about everything, even his identity. Katie and Michael, shaken by the discovery, distanced themselves from Thomas with a sense of disgust and bitterness. Their trust had been betrayed, their security compromised. The snowy night was just the beginning of a nightmare of secrets and deceit that would haunt them forever. Despite the pain and disappointment, Katie and Michael didn't give up. They held on to each other, finding in their union the strength to move forward. They decided to turn the page, leaving the past behind and looking to the future with renewed hope. Time passed, but the wound from the snowy night never fully healed. Katie and Michael continued to live with the fear of being pursued again. The shadow of suspicion accompanied them like a ghost, tainting every moment of joy. The wind howled through the gusts of the trees, lashing against the garage windows like a pack of hungry wolves. Inside, Tina, Mark, and Dawson, three 20-year-old friends, gathered for their usual evening of board games and laughter. The garage, spacious and illuminated by a dim light, was their safe haven, a refuge away from the troubles of the small countryside town they lived in. It was around 2 a.m. when the sound of sirens ripped through the silence of the night. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows, illuminating Mark's tense face. "What the hell is happening?" Tina asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Mark replied, getting up. "But we better go check." The three friends headed towards the garage entrance, their hearts pounding. The sirens grew closer and closer until a police car screeched to a halt in front of their hideout. 2 uniformed figures stepped out of the car, one tall and sturdy, the other smaller and more agile. They approached the group confidently, flashlights in hand, illuminating their faces. "Good evening," said the taller officer in a deep voice. "We received a report of a disturbance to the public peace. Can we come in?" Mark hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure," he replied with a trembling voice. "We didn't know we were disturbing anyone." The 2 officers entered the garage, scanning every corner with their piercing eyes. Tina and Dawson exchanged a nervous glance, a sense of unease growing within them. "What's your name?" the shorter officer asked Tina, shining the flashlight directly on her face. "Tina," she replied in a weak voice. "Tina Lang." "And you?" the taller officer asked Mark and Dawson. "Mark Robinson," answered Mark. "Dawson Mason," added Dawson. The 2 officers noted down their names in a notebook, never taking their eyes off them. "What are you doing here at this hour?" the shorter officer asked, adopting an accusatory tone. "We were playing board games," Tina replied. "We didn't mean to disturb anyone." "Did you have any guests tonight?" the taller officer inquired. "No," Mark answered. "Just the 3 of us." The 2 officers exchanged another glance, then approached Mark and Dawson. "We know you're hiding something," the shorter officer said menacingly. "It's better if you confess everything." Mark and Dawson looked at each other, terror painted on their faces. They didn't know what to say or do. "I don't know what you're talking about," stammered Mark. "We haven't done anything wrong," added Dawson. The 2 officers got even closer, their shadows looming over the 3 friends like a nightmare. "One last chance," said the taller officer in a cold voice. "Confess, or you'll regret lying to us." Tina, Mark, and Dawson were petrified. At that moment, a metallic noise came from the corner of the garage. "What was that?" the shorter officer asked, shining the flashlight toward the sound. A moment of silence fell over the garage, a tense and oppressive quiet. Then, a second metallic noise echoed in the darkness. "Is someone here?" the taller officer asked, his voice trembling. The 3 friends looked at each other, terror in their eyes. A shiver of fear ran through them like a cold blade. "We need to get out of here," Tina whispered. Mark and Dawson nodded silently. They moved toward the garage exit like silent shadows, trying not to make a sound. The 2 officers were still distracted, busy searching for the source of the metallic noises. The 3 friends seized the opportunity to slip away, disappearing into the dark and stormy night. They didn't stop until they were sure they had shaken off the 2 officers. The icy wind whipped at their faces, and the rain beat relentlessly on their bodies, but they paid no mind. The only thing that mattered was getting to safety. Unbridled sprints, dark alleys, panting breaths. Fear propelled them forward, adrenaline burning in their veins. They took refuge in an old, abandoned shed, huddling amidst the damp and cold shadows. There, in that dark and malodorous corner, they finally felt safe. They had escaped danger, but the fear still lingered within them. What would happen now? Who were those officers? And what did they want from them? The questions burned in their minds, but they had no answers. The only certainty was that their lives had changed forever. The sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky with a rosy light. The three friends emerged from the shed, the fresh morning air caressing them like a promise of hope. Megan, 21 years old, was a university student majoring in engineering with a brilliant mind and a fearless spirit. Always ready for adventure, she was the opposite of her boyfriend Connor, 23 years old, nearing graduation in medicine, more rational and cautious. Completing their group of friends were Sean, in the same year as Megan, a philosophy student with an artistic flair, and Sheila, a friend of all three who had dropped out of college to pursue her passion for music. One day, during a conversation at the campus bar, word spread about an abandoned hospital in California, the Old Town Hospital. The stories surrounding it were chilling, tales of secret experiments, missing patients, and eerie presences wandering the dark hallways. Megan, with her usual enthusiasm, suggested visiting it at night. Connor, initially hesitant, was persuaded by her tenacity and the infectious enthusiasm of Sean and Sheila. They had long wanted to explore that dark and mysterious place. In the deep night, the four friends found themselves in front of the imposing concrete structure. The air was thick with humidity, and silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the croaking of frogs. A sense of unease washed over them as they crossed the rusted gate and ventured into the darkness. The hospital was a labyrinth of dark corridors and silent rooms. Peeling walls and the smell of mold and medicine created a stifling atmosphere. The light from their flashlights illuminated only a small part of the darkness, casting unsettling shadows stretching behind them. Every creak, every sudden shadow made them jump. Sean, with his artistic flair, was inspired by the macabre atmosphere, jotting down his impressions in a notebook. Sheila, on the other hand, was the most sensitive in the group and felt uneasy in that environment. Continuing their exploration, the group stumbled upon an abandoned laboratory. Broken glass vials, rusty scalpels, and yellowed paper with indecipherable notes were scattered on the floor. Megan, with her analytical mind, began examining the remnants of experiments conducted in that place. Connor, being a diligent medical student, took time to read the patient's medical records, intrigued by their stories of suffering and pain. Sean, with his vivid imagination, was certain that within those walls, a dark secret was hidden. Sheila, growing increasingly nervous, pleaded with them to leave, but their determination was stronger than fear. In a dark room, hidden behind a rusted metal door, they made a gruesome discovery: a series of metal coffins stacked on top of each other, with names and dates engraved on the lids. A sudden noise made them jump. A shadow moved in the darkness. A piercing scream echoed through the hallways. Terrified, the friends scattered in the dark, trying to escape from this nightmare. Megan got lost in a labyrinth of identical rooms, chased by a silent figure glimpsed only briefly. Connor tripped over a rusty stretcher and fell to the ground, injuring his ankle. Sean and Sheila, in an attempt to help him, stumbled upon a room full of broken mirrors, where their own reflections terrified them. Reuniting, the four friends fled the hospital like madmen. Dawn found them exhausted and terrified, but alive. They swore never to set foot in that accursed place again. In the following weeks, the friends continued to grapple with the terror they had experienced. Megan, usually rational, was plagued by recurring nightmares. Connor, as a future doctor, tried to rationalize what had happened, but couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease. Sean, with his artistic sensibility, was obsessed with the desire to paint the horror he had witnessed, but couldn't find the words to describe it. Sheila, the most fragile of the group, sank into a deep depression, unable to overcome the trauma. The sun lazily set over the chaotic New York, tinting the facades of skyscrapers with pink. Carol, with a sigh of relief, shut down the computer and prepared to leave the office. As the secretary of the gruff CEO of the software company Innovatech, her day had been a succession of phone calls, emails, and appointments. Carol, 32 years old with an insatiable zest for life, was the kind soul of the office. Tall and slender, with her copper-colored hair and joyfully sparkling green eyes, she was always ready to help colleagues with a smile. Her love for music accompanied her everywhere. She hummed while organizing her desk, dreamed of melodies during coffee breaks, and blasted rock music on her way home. The apartment she shared with her cat Kiki was her sanctuary, a small nest of music and books where she recharged after long workdays. That Friday evening, something was different. An unsettling sense of oppression pervaded the deserted office. Carol looked around nervously. The once reassuring neon lights now cast sinister shadows on the furniture. A metallic noise echoed from upstairs. Driven by uncontrollable curiosity, Carol cautiously climbed the stairs. Darkness enveloped the CEO's office. Only a thin strip of light filtered from under the door. A shiver ran down her spine. She pressed her ear to the door and held her breath. A muffled sound like a strangled moan echoed in the room. With trembling hands, Carol turned the handle and opened the door. The scene that unfolded before her left her speechless. The CEO was there, sitting at his desk, head in his hands. His shoulders trembled, and a subdued groan escaped his lips. "Director?" Carol asked, her voice barely audible. The man raised his head. His face was pale and streaked with tears. "Help me, Carol," he whispered. "Please, help me." Carol approached the director, concerned. "What's wrong?" she asked. The man took a deep breath and began to speak. His words were confused and fragmented, but Carol understood the essence. The director had fallen victim to blackmail. Someone had threatened to reveal a dark secret, something that could destroy his career and reputation. He was desperate, unsure whom to turn to. He had contemplated suicide, but then had an idea. "Carol, I know you're an honest and reliable person," the director said. "The only one I can trust." Carol was shocked. She didn't know what to say or do. "Please, Carol," the director pleaded. "Help me find who's blackmailing me. I promise I'll be grateful forever." Carol remained silent for a few minutes, weighing her options. She knew it would be a risk, but she couldn't let the director take his own life. "Okay," she finally said. "I'll help you." Carol and the director began to investigate. They tried to trace the origin of the threats, but without success. The blackmailer seemed like a ghost, invisible and elusive. Tension grew every day. Carol was consumed by the search, barely sleeping and eating little. Her cat Kiki was the only company she had left. One day, Carol received an anonymous phone call. The voice on the other end of the line instructed her to go to a secluded location, threatening to reveal the director's secret if she didn't comply. Carol was terrified, but she knew she couldn't back down. She had given her word to the director and couldn't betray him. She went to the appointment with her heart pounding. The location was an abandoned warehouse, dark and gloomy. Carol looked around, trembling with fear. Suddenly, a hooded figure emerged from the shadows. "Finally, you've arrived," said the figure with a distorted voice. Carol tried to speak, but fear choked her words. "Did you bring what I asked for?" the figure inquired. Carol nodded and handed the figure an envelope containing a substantial amount of money. "Good," said the figure. "Now go away and never show your face again." Carol turned and ran without looking back. She was still terrified, but she knew she had done the right thing. The next day, Carol went to the director's office. She was ready to tell him everything that had happened. The director listened attentively, then smiled at her. "Thank you, Carol," he said. "You were truly courageous." "It was nothing," Carol replied. "I'm just glad I could help." The director shook her hand. "You're a truly special person, Carol," he said. I don't know what I would have done without you." Clara, a talented young photographer, lived in the quiet town of Peabody, Massachusetts. Her passion for photography had led her to work for the local newspaper, the Peabody Chronicle. One day, her boss assigned her a special task: to create a photo shoot to promote the town's annual clown festival. Excited about the opportunity, Clara got to work right away. She contacted the event organizer, a man named Jack, who arranged to meet her at the clown tent on the outskirts of town. When Clara arrived at the location, she immediately noticed the eerie atmosphere surrounding the tent. Despite it being broad daylight, the area seemed shrouded in unnatural darkness. Jack greeted her with a sinister smile painted on his face. He was a tall, slender man with black hair and piercing eyes. He wore a clown costume complete with a red nose and oversized shoes. Clara, trying to ignore the discomfort she felt, began taking photos of the clowns as they prepared for the show. As she worked, Clara noticed some unsettling details. The clowns seemed to stare at her with menacing glances, and their smiles appeared more like wicked grins than expressions of joy. One of them, in particular, seemed to follow her wherever she went. He was a clown with a black and white striped costume and a blood-red smile painted on his face. Growing increasingly uneasy, Clara decided to conclude the photo shoot as soon as possible. As she made her way towards the exit of the tent, the black and white clown stood in her way, blocking her path. "Where do you think you're going, sweetheart?" he said in a hoarse, menacing voice. Terrified, Clara tried to escape, but the clown grabbed her arm. In that moment, she felt a piercing pain in her neck. The clown had injected something into her with a syringe. Clara lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground. When she woke up, she found herself tied to a chair in a dark, damp room. The clowns surrounded her, laughing and grinning maniacally. Jack stepped forward, his smile more sinister than ever. "Welcome to our little club, Clara," he said. "Now you're part of the show." Terrified, Clara struggled against her restraints, but it was futile. The clowns dragged her onto the stage of the tent, where an audience of masked people awaited her. It was only then that Clara realized the horrible truth. It wasn't a clown party, but a cult of psychotic killers. For the next few hours, Clara was subjected to unspeakable torture as the clowns engaged in increasingly brutal acts of violence. The audience applauded and laughed, encouraging the clowns to push further. Eventually, as Clara was on the brink of losing her sanity, Jack approached her with a knife in hand. "It's time to end the show," he said with a cruel grin. Clara closed her eyes, preparing for the inevitable. The next morning, Clara's lifeless body was found hanging from a tree near the clown tent, a blood-red smile painted on her face. The Peabody police were shocked by the brutal crime scene and immediately began their investigation. However, every lead seemed to hit a dead end. The clowns had vanished into thin air, leaving only the empty tent and bloodstains on the ground. Authorities scoured the town and surrounding areas, but found no trace of the perpetrators. In the following months, the town of Peabody was shrouded in a veil of fear and paranoia. Residents were afraid to leave their homes, fearing they might become the next victims of the killer clowns. The streets were deserted, and shops closed before sunset. The police continued to investigate, but to no avail. It seemed the clowns had vanished into thin air, leaving only a terrifying memory in the minds of Peabody's citizens. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Clara's death, the Peabody Chronicle received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo of Clara, bound and gagged, surrounded by the clowns. On the back of the photo was a message written in red ink. "The show must go on." The police reopened the case, but once again, they failed to find any trace of the killer clowns. Some say they are still out there waiting for their next victim. Others argue they are just an urban legend born from Clara's tragic death. But one thing is certain. In Peabody, the smile of a clown will never be seen in the same way again. The town still bears the scars of that terrible night, and the memory of Clara, the young photographer who only wanted to capture a moment of joy, will live on forever in the hearts of those who knew her. So, as the shadows lengthen on the streets of Peabody and the autumn wind rustles the leaves, residents wonder if the killer clowns have truly disappeared or if they are just waiting for the right moment to strike again. And on those dark, moonless nights, when silence envelops the town, some swear they can hear in the distance the echo of an evil laugh, a sinister reminder of the terror lurking behind the smile of a clown.